Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. There's a local dollar store in my neighborhood. It's pretty close to my apartment, closer than any other stores like Target, Walmart, or the grocery store. Because of that, I used to go there all the time. I was there at least twice a week to get whatever I needed. It was just a 2 to 3 minute drive from my place. The store was like most dollar stores, somewhat small, and it wasn't usually busy, which was nice. One evening, I went to the dollar store to grab a few things. I walked inside, and like usual, it wasn't busy. There were just a few people shopping throughout the store. I began looking for the first thing I was going to buy when suddenly a woman approached me out of nowhere. She had dark hair, was quite short, and was wearing glasses and a black coat. After approaching me, she said she saw me there all the time. I said that yes, I did shop there quite a bit. The woman then described the things I would usually buy and mentioned how she always saw me get the off-brand Gatorade and one particular brand of chips that I really liked. This was kind of weird to me. I mean, how close had she been watching me to memorize all this stuff? Why did she even come over to say this in the first place? I said yes and tried to laugh it off. The conversation ended abruptly with the woman saying she would see me later. I then walked away and continued with my shopping. I didn't see the lady again until almost the end of my shopping trip. I was in an aisle when I happened to look up randomly and saw her walking by, filming me with her phone. She was trying to hide it but doing a terrible job. I could see her phone was pointed right at me. She didn't even look at me and walked past, pretending to look at a product on a shelf about 20 feet away. Even though she was looking at some items and not in my direction, she kept her phone facing me the entire time. I was so confused. I thought about confronting her, but decided to just check out and leave. When I started walking away, I saw her angle her phone to keep it on me. When I looked over, she quickly moved it away again. I really wanted to confront her, but I decided not to. As weird as this was, who knew what would happen if I confronted her directly? As long as something like this didn't happen again, I wouldn't try to pay it too much mind. I headed up, paid for my items, and left the store. The woman didn't follow me or anything. She stayed inside when I left. After getting out of the dollar store, I headed back home. It was about 2 or 3 days later when I went to the store again. I had sort of forgotten about that woman this time. I don't remember noticing her at all. The next time I was there, she was right back again. This was roughly a week after our last interaction. It was a little later at night, and the dollar store was even quieter than before. I didn't see the lady as I walked in. I was going around the store, getting some items I wanted to buy, when I noticed something out of the front windows. The windows looked out to the parking lot, and you could see a good amount of it. There were maybe 3 or 4 cars in the entire lot, but I could see the same woman from before standing next to my car. She appeared to be either filming it or taking photos of the outside. She also recorded my license plate. When I saw this, I decided to leave. I checked out and kept an eye on her the whole time. I watched as she tried to open one of the doors to my car. Luckily, I had locked it. As soon as I made it out of the doors, I saw the woman immediately duck behind another nearby car in the parking lot. When I reached my vehicle, I called out to her, asking her what the hell she was doing. I got no response. I knew she was still hiding behind that car, but she wasn't answering me. I didn't think it would be a good idea to approach her or stick around to say anything else. I just climbed into my car and drove home. I decided after that it would probably be smart not to go back to that store for quite a while, and I haven't been back since then. That was about 6 months ago, and I haven't seen that lady again at all. I'm hoping I never do. I live by myself in an apartment. I have a 1-bedroom place on the 2nd floor of my building, and I've lived here for about 2 years or so. The creepiest thing to ever happen to me took place just a couple of months ago. I had gotten home from work several hours earlier. After making some food and eating, I was relaxing on the couch and watching some TV. My living room is at the back end of the apartment, and the front half is mostly the kitchen space. That's also where the front door is. It was sometime at night. I don't recall exactly what time, but it was very dark outside. All of a sudden, everything went pitch black. The power had just gone out. It was really strange, and I didn't know why this could have possibly happened. I got up and looked out the window. It wasn't even raining. I wasn't really sure why the power had gone out. The only time it had ever gone out before was during a really bad storm, and that had only happened once. I didn't even own a flashlight, so I had to use the one on my phone. I walked over to the small closet that had all the fuses and stuff. I had no idea what I was doing, so I just turned around and left. I knew that I wasn't overloading any of the outlets or anything. I figured something must have happened with the power in the area. I went out onto my balcony and looked around. I noticed that the lights in other people's units appeared to be off as well. The whole building must have just lost power. Why? I didn't know. I went back over to the couch and sat down. I went on YouTube with my phone and started watching some videos. All of a sudden, there was a knock at the front door of my apartment. It wasn't a very loud knocking noise. In fact, it was pretty quiet. I could barely even hear it. I paused the video and looked over to the door. I didn't know what could possibly be going on. I was going to get up and check, but following the knocking sounds, there was this ominous laughter. It was the sound of a man laughing in the creepiest way imaginable. When I heard that, I stopped. I no longer wanted to get up and see who was there. After a few seconds of nothing, the man outside began to knock once more. He began to laugh again as well. I ignored it. I didn't really know what was going on, but after the second knock, followed by laughter, I knew I didn't want to have anything to do with this guy. I didn't hear anything else for a short while. I think the guy must have walked away. After that, things were pretty quiet. I sat down on my couch and went back to watching YouTube. I tried to forget about the whole thing. A while later, though, the man returned. There was once again a lone knocking on the door, followed by his creepy and unsettling laughter. This time, I decided to get up and actually see who the heck was there. As creeped out as I was also curious as to who was doing this and why. My eyes had adjusted pretty well to the darkness at this point, but it was still extremely hard to see. I used my phone to guide my way toward the front door. When I got there, I looked out the peephole. I noticed the backup lights had gone on in the hallway. Whenever the power went out, there were these other lights out in the hallway that would turn on. To my surprise, nobody was at my door. I opened up my front door and looked down the hallway. I took a couple of steps outside, and when I did, I saw a man standing about 50 feet away, facing the other direction. He was a much larger man who I didn't recognize at all. The instant he heard my door open, he turned around and began sprinting in my direction. The man ran nearly all the way to my door before I managed to get it closed again. He began to knock on it, and this time he laughed, an exaggerated and loud laugh. Finally, he left. I stopped hearing any more knocking after that. About an hour later, the power came back on. The guy luckily did not return. The next day, I was on the internet portal site of the apartment complex. I saw on there that several other residents had complained about the strange knocking and laughter. Apparently, I wasn't the only one dealing with this guy. The thing is, nobody figured out who he was or how he got inside the building. He certainly did not live there, though. This story takes place many years ago when I was camping alone out in California. I haven't gone camping in many years now, but when I was younger, I would go on many weekend camping trips to get out in nature by myself and relax. I did these camping trips quite frequently, almost every other weekend. I loved being out in nature, but I did not like the discomfort of sleeping on the ground in a tent. Since I went camping so often, it made sense for me to purchase a small camper that would attach to and detach from the bed of my truck. It was really nice and could comfortably fit me, and even one more person if needed. On one of my trips, I drove about 5 hours away from my house to a beautiful area I hadn't been to before. I spent the day doing a long hike and then cooling off in a peaceful lake during the evening. By nighttime, I had parked my truck in a quiet, remote area, sort of up a mountain so I could get a nice view. When I woke up in the morning, I was still up, reading a book by flashlight when I heard footsteps outside and someone approaching my truck. Normally, I don't ever have people walking anywhere near my vehicle, so it was odd to hear for sure. Maybe I had parked in a bad spot or somewhere I wasn't technically allowed to be, and somebody was coming to let me know. Either way, I didn't feel comfortable, especially since it was after dark now. I called out a greeting to whoever this was. "Hello. Who's there?" The footsteps approached closer, and a raspy male voice responded, "Hi there. I just wanted to check out your camper. Pretty nifty, huh?" I was really quite comfortable laying in my bed in the camper in the back of the truck, so I yelled out that I could show them in the morning, assuming they were someone who was camping nearby. There was no response from the man outside for what felt like a couple of minutes. Finally, I began to make out him muttering something to himself, but I couldn't really understand any of what he was saying. Assuming that would be that, I went back to reading. Oddly enough, I did not hear any footsteps retreating away. The man still had to be standing there, and he was. After a few moments, I heard footsteps moving around my truck, but still not leaving. There were tiny little porthole-like windows on the side of my camper, which I kept covered with curtains at night. I looked out, but I couldn't see this man at all. It sounded like he'd walked to the front of my truck. Next thing I know, I heard some quiet thumps starting from the hood and eventually getting closer to me. Whoever this person was, they had the audacity to climb onto my vehicle and crawl onto the roof of my truck toward the camper. I was a person who took very good care of my truck, and this guy was really pissing me off, to say the least. I shouted out, alerting the person I had a gun with me, and if they didn't get off and leave, I was going to come out and blast them. I heard the man get off my vehicle and walk away a bit. I still didn't hear their footsteps fade away as they would have if they had completely left. I got out of my camper with the firearm and my flashlight. Upon pointing the flashlight around me, I saw the man crouching down near a bush about 40 feet away. As the flashlight illuminated him, he backed away further into the darkness. I had enough with whoever this person was. At this point, I didn't know if it was someone on drugs or somebody even crazier, but I yelled at him to leave and not come back. I was already up at this point and was driving back home in the morning anyway. I packed up all my stuff and headed home early. Whether it be due to scary encounters such as this or something animal-related, I always carry a firearm on me when I go camping. I'm thankful I had it on me that night. I work at a small perfume store in a large mall. This mall has literally hundreds of stores inside of it, and the store I work at is one of the smaller ones. It only requires one employee at a time. We sell all kinds of perfumes as well as a few skin products. Our store is open until the mall closes, which is 8 p.m. One time, I was working at the store until 8 o'clock, and I would be all by myself for the shift. Normally, the store was pretty quiet. Sometimes, if the mall was really busy, we'd get a lot of customers, but usually, there weren't that many people in the store at once. I was sitting behind the counter, which faced directly toward the entrance and a large window on the other side of the entrance doors. The day went by as usual. For the most part, we got some customers here and there, but it was mostly quiet. At around 5 or 6, though, something really strange happened. I remember that nobody was in the store at that particular time. I was just sitting behind the counter when I noticed a man walking past the store. He was wearing a really creepy-looking mask, not quite a clown mask, but it looked sort of similar. He then turned and looked into the window right at me. He pressed his face up against the glass. It was quite creepy, but I figured it to be a joke and laughed it off. The man stayed at the window for an uncomfortable amount of time, over a minute, then he finally stopped and walked a distance away. Before he passed by the store completely, though, he stopped again and looked in once more. He stared for a little while before turning and walking away. Extremely weird. Over the next hour or so, I got a few more customers, and we made a few sales. People would walk past the shop down the mall hallway all the time, but the later it got, the quieter it became. At around 7 o'clock, I saw the strange man yet again. He walked past the shop once more and did not stop. He did turn around to look at me as he passed by, though. It was very interesting, for lack of a better word. I didn't really know what this guy was doing. Why was he just walking all around the mall? I figured he was probably messing with a lot of people, trying to get a reaction out of them. I didn't see the man for the rest of the time that we were open. At 8 o'clock, I went over to the entrance and closed our glass doors, then locked them up. After that, I just had to finish up by doing a few things, and then I could leave for the night. I went back to the counter and would be able to leave in probably 5 minutes. As I was behind the counter, though, I saw the man had returned, the same guy, still wearing his creepy mask. He stopped right in front of the 2 doors and started to stare at me. Then he rushed up to them and tried to open them, but they were locked. After that, he started to walk away. I figured that he was leaving the mall. After all, it was now closed, and no stores would be open anymore. The man did not go out of my sight, though. Instead, when he reached the end, he turned around and walked back, then started pacing back and forth in front of the shop and looking in at me almost the entire time. I tried my best to ignore him. Soon, though, I was done with work, and I wanted to leave. The thing is, I couldn't exactly leave with this guy out there waiting for me. I was hoping he would just go away on his own, but he didn't. After several more minutes, I was starting to get impatient. I hoped one of the mall's security guards would see him and tell him he had to go by now. He was probably one of the last people left, if not the very last one. He continued to stand around and look at me every so often. Sometimes he would pace around a little more, but he would never move out of my line of sight. It was like he was just waiting for me to leave. He seemed to know that I was off now, but I wasn't going to leave with this guy out there. I didn't know who he was or what he was capable of. Before, I figured him to be harmless, but now I wasn't quite so sure. This went on for quite a while when, finally, I saw one of the mall security guards come into my view in front of the store. He started speaking to the man. I couldn't really hear what was being said exactly. I could just hear their voices. Not long at all after they started speaking, the masked man walked away and out of sight. The security guard followed. There was not too much of an interaction. Most likely, the guard had just told him the mall was closed and he had to leave. Still, I waited a couple of minutes and made sure the guy didn't return. Then I was finally able to leave the store. I walked the now empty hallways of the mall and out to my car in the parking lot. When I got outside and into the lot, I remember looking to my left. One of the first things I noticed was that the masked man was right there. He was just sort of standing around 100 feet away. He was near another set of entrance doors, standing on the sidewalk out front. I hoped he would not look over and see me. I walked as fast as I could to get to my car, and I was able to get there okay. I quickly left. When I did, I saw the guy still waiting in the parking lot. I don't know if he was waiting for me to leave or what. Maybe he thought I was going to exit out those other doors. Either way, I'm glad I was able to get out safely and make it back home after that. I never saw the guy again. I still sometimes wonder what his plans were. This happened to me many years ago in a neighborhood I used to live in. I lived in a quiet neighborhood in a very hilly area. It was a very nice place to live. There were a lot of winding roads with big houses and large yards. I'm guessing a lot of the houses in the area were built by the same company because most of them were quite similar. The basement of the houses was actually on ground level, and the main floor and upper levels of the house were above that. All the houses had a big set of stairs attached, so to access the main floor, you wouldn't have to go through the basement area of your home. Due to the fact that the basements were on the ground level, many people had sliding doors in their basements that would lead out into the backyard. The reason for the in-depth description of the layout of these houses is because this is also how my house was built. The last summer I spent living in that neighborhood, there occurred a series of break-ins in people's homes, my house included. The night my house was broken into, I wasn't there at the time, but a couple of items were taken from my basement, including a bike I kept down there. Later that summer, on one of my evening walks, I was shocked to see a younger man riding towards me on what appeared to be my own bike. I figured this guy must have purchased the bike from the person who'd stolen it, and I could get some information on the culprit who was breaking into all our basements. I flagged down the guy on the bike as he approached. I indicated that I wanted to talk to him. Upon me mentioning that the bike was mine and that I was interested in who he bought it from, the young man suddenly appeared very uncomfortable. Instantly, I realized this was perhaps the guy who had stolen my bike and broken into the basement in the first place. Before he could begin pedaling away, I grabbed a firm hold of the handlebars to stop him. My suspicions were further confirmed when the man jumped off my bike. To my surprise, he pulled out a small knife or switchblade. Full of fear at the sudden escalation of the situation, I quickly hopped onto my own bike and put some distance between us. Biking down the street, the young man began to come after me, as though he was going to chase me, but it seemed he thought better of it. Maybe he thought he couldn't catch up to me. He began to run away. I biked home and notified the cops immediately of the young man and what he looked like. I alerted our neighborhood group chat as well and gave a brief description of him. The cops never did end up finding him or identifying who he was. Nobody in our neighborhood ended up seeing him again or having another basement broken into. None of them knew who he was either. I was always nervous that I might run into the violent man again someday. It ended up being a very frightful encounter on the street, but it was nice to get my bike back. This is something that happened a couple of years ago. One of my good friends is a guy named Drew. We grew up together and had been friends since we were kids. At the time of this story, Drew had just recently gotten married to his wife, Jennifer. I remember that after they got married, they bought a house a little bit out in the country. It wasn't really that far away, maybe about 20 to 30 minutes, but it was a bit further from the city than I had ever lived. Same with Drew, both of us grew up in a much more populated area. They wanted more space, and the property was really big, though much of it was wooded. Shortly after moving there, Drew invited me out to his place to come and check it out. When I got there, I was very impressed. They still had to get much more furniture because it was a much bigger house than the apartment they'd had before. The yard was especially cool, though, because the house wasn't even that close to any neighbors at all. The woods were so large. There had been some paths in the woods, but they hadn't been maintained in many years. Because of this, some of the paths were okay, and some were completely overgrown with tall grass and other plants. Drew wanted to show me the woods as well, so we walked out there. He said his plan was to buy a couple of four-wheelers and restore the paths himself, then he could drive them through the woods. It seemed cool to me. We went out to investigate the shape of the paths and mark off some points that had to be cleared. We ended up going pretty far out. I didn't realize just how big the woods were. We had been walking for quite a while, and the paths around this point were very covered up. That's when I first noticed that somebody else was out there as well. I just remember randomly looking over to the left when, a far distance away, I saw a man. This man was seemingly just walking through the middle of the forest. It was a really odd sight. I asked Drew if there were any neighbors' properties close by, and he said no, their property was the only one on the street with large woods. I told him that I'd just seen a man walking a distance away. by now, the guy was already out of sight. I had only seen him for a moment before he was not in view anymore. Drew said that nobody should be out here, and this was his land. He was 100% sure of that. We walked a little ways back to try and see where the man had gone, but we had no luck. The guy was so far away, and there were so many things in between us. Drew called out, asking if anybody was there, but got no response. We both hoped that maybe it was just a neighbor who, for some reason, had wandered onto Drew's property. Honestly, we had no clue, but we knew the guy was not supposed to be there. I thought the guy would leave when he realized we were out there in the woods. We continued to find the path locations and were marking them off by sticking markers into the ground. About 20 minutes later, we walked around a corner and heard a noise from behind us. We both looked back and saw the man. He crossed the path from one of the wooded parts to another. He was about 100 feet away. We saw him as he quickly darted out and disappeared back into the dense woods. Drew yelled at him, though, and we both started going in his direction. Drew yelled that this was private property, and the man had to leave. We got to the location on the path where the man had crossed, and we looked into the woods where he had gone. The man never replied to Drew, and we no longer saw or heard any sign of him. He would have had enough time to be a good distance away by now. Drew yelled one more thing, saying that if he saw him again, he was calling the cops. After that, we continued on. Still, by this point, we were both very suspicious of seeing the man. We wrapped up and decided to go back to Drew's house. We were at least a 15-minute walk from getting out of the woods. About 10 minutes later, we were maybe 5 minutes from being out of the woods. There was another noise behind us. We looked back, and the man was there again. This time, he came out of the woods and onto the path and began moving towards us. Drew and I just took off running. For some reason, I just had a feeling this guy was dangerous. Clearly, he was not listening and not bothered with the threat of the police. We ran all the way out of the woods and into the rest of Drew's yard. We then went inside, and Drew called the cops. When the cops got out to his property, they searched a little bit of the woods. However, the man was never found. Somehow, he was able to elude the police. I went home after that and was honestly glad that I didn't live there. I kept up with Drew, and he updated me on some things. He said the man never returned, at least not as far as he was aware of. Drew still lives there with Jennifer, and I've been to their house several times. He was able to complete the pass for his four-wheelers in the woods. Luckily, he hasn't seen the man at all. We never found out who the guy was or what he was doing there in the first place. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.